My name is Lila Marie Evans, and when I was 24 years old, my parents left me $1 in their will. One single solitary dollar, crisp and folded neatly in an envelope, with my name scrawled across it in my mother's careful cursive. The rest of their estate, $800,000, the house I grew up in, the land my grandfather tilled with his own hands, every last piece of their legacy, they gave to my brother, Caleb. My abusive, cruel, manipulative brother who had spent his life tearing me down, belittling me, and making sure I knew I was nothing. That $1 wasn't just an insult, it was a declaration. It was my parents saying, in the clearest way possible, that I was worth less than pocket change to them. I can still feel the weight of that moment, sitting in the lawyer's office, the air thick with the smell of polished wood and stale coffee. Mr. Hargrove, the attorney, looked at me with pity in his eyes, his glasses slipping down his nose as he slid the envelope across the desk. I didn't want to open it. I knew what was inside, not the exact amount, but the message. I'd spent my whole life preparing for it. My hands trembled as I tore the paper, and there it was, a single bill tucked inside a letter that read, "To Lila, as per our agreement." Agreement? What agreement? I was their daughter, not a stranger they'd made a deal with. I looked up at Mr. Hargrove, my throat tight, my eyes burning, and he just shook his head. "I'm sorry, Lila," he said. "This is what they wanted." I didn't cry, not then. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction, even if they were already gone. My parents had died in a car accident 6 months earlier, a sudden collision on a rain-slicked highway. I'd mourned them, despite everything. I'd stood at their funeral, my black dress clinging to my skin in the humid August air, and wept for the parents I wished they'd been. I'd hoped, foolishly, that their deaths might bring some kind of closure, some final gesture of love or regret. Instead, they left me with this, $1 and a wound so deep it felt like my heart had been carved out. Growing up in our small town of Willow Creek, I was always the odd one out. My parents, Margaret and Thomas Evans, were pillars of the community. My father was a deacon at the First Baptist Church, his voice booming during Sunday sermons about forgiveness and grace. My mother was the perfect homemaker, her pies winning blue ribbons at the county fair, her smile warm for everyone except me. To the outside world, we were the ideal family. 2 kids, a white picket fence, a golden retriever named Rusty. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. Caleb was their golden boy, their pride and joy. He could do no wrong. When he broke a window playing baseball, they laughed and called it spirited. When he failed a math test, they hired a tutor and bragged about his potential. But me, I was the mistake, the afterthought, the daughter they never quite knew what to do with. I was quiet as a child, always reading, always dreaming. I'd lose myself in books about faraway places, imagining a life where I wasn't invisible. But my parents didn't see my imagination as a gift. They saw it as a flaw. "Stop daydreaming, Lila," my mother would snap, her voice sharp as she stirred a pot of soup. "You need to be practical. Nobody likes a girl who's got her head in the clouds." My father was worse. He'd look at me with this disappointed frown, like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "You're too sensitive," he'd say, as if feeling things deeply was a crime. "Toughen up, or the world's gonna eat you alive." Caleb, though, was their world. He was 3 years older than me, tall and broad-shouldered, even as a teenager, with a charm that could fool anyone. To the neighbors, he was the polite young man who mowed their lawns and carried their groceries. But to me, he was a storm. He'd taunt me endlessly, calling me Lila the loser, tripping me in the hallway, hiding my books just to watch me cry. Once, when I was 10, he locked me in the basement for 3 hours, laughing as I banged on the door, my voice hoarse from screaming. When my parents finally let me out, they didn't punish him. "Boys will be boys," my mother said, ruffling his hair. My father just told me to stop provoking him. Provoking him, as if my existence was enough to justify his cruelty. The worst part wasn't even Caleb's abuse. It was how my parents enabled it. They saw his behavior and chose to ignore it, to excuse it, to reward it. When I got straight A's in school, they barely noticed. But when Caleb made the varsity football team, they threw a party, inviting half the town to celebrate. When I won a poetry contest in 8th grade, my mother said, "That's nice, dear," without looking up from her sewing. But when Caleb got into a fist fight and gave another kid a black eye, my father clapped him on the back and said, "That's my boy." I learned early on that love in our house was a currency, and I was always bankrupt. By the time I was a teenager, I'd started to believe I deserved it. Maybe I was too sensitive, too quiet, too different. Maybe if I tried harder, smiled more, spoke less, they'd love me. I threw myself into pleasing them. I helped my mother with chores, stayed out of Caleb's way, even joined the church choir because my father said it would make me less selfish. But nothing worked. The more I tried, the more they pulled away. And Caleb, he got worse. He'd come into my room at night, just to scare me, whispering that I was a burden, that nobody wanted me. "You're nothing, Lila," he'd say, his voice low and venomous. "You'll always be nothing." When I was 16, I started planning my escape. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling, dreaming of college, of a city far away where nobody knew my name. I worked hard in school, not for their approval anymore, but for me. I wanted to prove I was more than their disappointment. I got a part-time job at the local diner, saving every penny for a future I could barely imagine. My parents didn't notice. They were too busy praising Caleb, who'd dropped out of community college and was now working at a car dealership, charming customers and raking in commissions. "He's going places," my father would say, his eyes shining with pride. I wondered what it felt like to have someone believe in you like that. The day I got accepted to college was the first time I felt like I could breathe. I'd applied to a small liberal arts school in Massachusetts, far enough from Willow Creek that I could start over. The acceptance letter came in a thick envelope, my name printed in bold letters. I held it to my chest, tears streaming down my face, and for a moment I thought maybe I'd show it to my parents. Maybe this would be the thing that made them see me. But when I walked into the kitchen, my mother was on the phone, laughing about Caleb's latest sales bonus. My father was at the table, reading the paper. I stood there, the letter in my hand, waiting for them to notice. They didn't, so I slipped it into my backpack and never mentioned it. I left for college the following fall, my beat-up suitcase packed with secondhand clothes and a heart full of hope. My parents didn't drive me to the airport. They said they couldn't afford the gas, but I saw Caleb's new truck in the driveway, shiny and red, paid for with their help. I took a bus to the airport, my savings dwindling with every mile. As the plane took off, I looked out the window at the patchwork of fields below and promised myself I'd never come back. Not to Willow Creek, not to them, not to the girl they'd convinced me I was, but life has a way of pulling you back, doesn't it? 6 years later, I was sitting in that lawyer's office, staring at a dollar bill that felt heavier than the world. My parents were gone, and they'd made their final choice. They'd chosen Caleb, just like they always had. And me, I was left with nothing but the echo of their rejection, ringing in my ears like a bell that wouldn't stop. I walked out of that office, the dollar in my pocket, and stood on the sidewalk, the autumn wind biting at my skin. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know how to keep going when the people who were supposed to love me most had told me, in their last act, that I was worthless. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the pain and the anger, a small voice whispered that I wasn't done yet, that $1 wasn't the end of my story, it was just the beginning. The days after the lawyer's office blurred into a haze of grief and rage. I'd walk the streets of Boston, where I'd built a life far from Willow Creek, and feel like a stranger in my own skin. That single dollar stayed in my pocket, a cruel reminder I couldn't bring myself to spend. I'd take it out sometimes, late at night, in my tiny studio apartment, and stare at it under the dim glow of a lamp. It wasn't just money, it was my parents' final word on who I was. Worthless, invisible, a footnote in their story, I'd hold it until my hands shook, tears dripping onto the paper, and wonder how I was supposed to keep going when the people who made me had thrown me away. I was 24, working as a junior copywriter at a small marketing firm, barely scraping by. My apartment was a shoebox in a crumbling building with pipes that groaned like they were mourning alongside me. I'd moved to Boston for college, stayed for the promise of a fresh start, but the city felt cold now, its gray skies mirroring the storm inside me. I'd always been good at holding myself together. Years of surviving Caleb's cruelty and my parents' indifference had taught me that. But this was different. This wasn't just a slight or a dismissal. This was a betrayal so deep it felt like my roots had been ripped out of the earth. I stopped eating much, not on purpose, but because food tasted like ash. I'd sit at my kitchen table, a wobbly thrift store find, and stare at a bowl of cereal until it turned to mush. Sleep was worse. I'd lie awake, replaying every moment of my childhood, searching for clues. Had there been a time when they loved me? A single memory where I wasn't the outsider? I'd think of my mother's hands, soft and flour-dusted, braiding my hair when I was 5. Had that been love or just habit? I'd picture my father carrying me on his shoulders at a county fair, his laughter rumbling through me. Was that real, or was I inventing it to fill the void? The more I searched, the emptier I felt. Work became my only anchor, though even that was slipping. I'd sit at my desk, surrounded by the chatter of colleagues and the hum of computers, and struggle to focus. My boss, a sharp woman named Vanessa, noticed. She'd call me into her office, her eyes narrowing with concern. "Lila, you're off your game," she'd say, not unkindly. "Is everything okay?" I'd nod, force a smile, and mumble something about being tired. But I wasn't tired, I was drowning. I couldn't tell her about the will, about the dollar, about the brother who'd gotten everything while I was left with nothing. It was too raw, too humiliating, so I kept it inside, where it festered like a wound that wouldn't heal. The worst moments came at night, when the world was quiet and there was nowhere to hide from myself. I'd think about Caleb, living in our childhood home, surrounded by the things that should have been mine too. The oak table where we'd eaten Sunday dinners. The garden my mother tended, its roses blooming red and wild. The land my grandfather had worked, passed down through generations. All of it was his now. I imagined him lounging in the living room, his feet propped on the coffee table, smirking like he'd won some game I didn't even know we were playing. I hated him. I hated my parents. But most of all, I hated myself for still caring, for still wanting their love, even after they'd made it clear I didn't deserve it. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I met Ms. Rosa. She lived in the apartment next to mine, a tiny woman in her 70s with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see right through you. I'd seen her in the hallway before, always carrying a canvas bag, stuffed with yarn or books, but we'd never spoken beyond a polite nod. That night, I was sitting on the fire escape, the dollar in my hand, the city's lights blurring through my tears. I didn't hear her at first, her footsteps soft, as she climbed out her own window and settled beside me. "You're gonna catch a cold out here, child," she said, her voice warm and gravelly, like she'd smoked one too many cigarettes in her youth. I startled, wiping my face, embarrassed to be caught like this. "I'm fine," I mumbled, but she just chuckled, low and knowing. "Fine's a lie we tell when we're too tired to tell the truth. What's got you out here crying over a dollar bill?" I froze, my fingers tightening around the money. How did she know? She tilted her head, her eyes soft but piercing. "I've lived long enough to recognize pain when I see it. Spill it, girl. It's just you, me, and the stars." I don't know why I told her. Maybe it was her voice, steady and kind. Maybe it was the way she didn't push, just waited, like she had all the time in the world. Or maybe I was just so tired of carrying it alone. So I talked. I told her about the will, the dollar, my parents' rejection. I told her about Caleb, his cruelty, the way he'd made me feel small my whole life. I told her about the house, the land, the life I'd never have, because they'd chosen him over me. By the time I finished, my voice was hoarse, my face wet with tears I hadn't realized I was shedding. Ms. Rosa didn't say anything at first. She just reached over and squeezed my hand, her skin warm and papery. "That's a heavy load you're carrying," she said finally. "But you know what? You're still here. You're still breathing. That means you're stronger than they ever gave you credit for." I shook my head, the words feeling hollow. "I don't feel strong. I feel broken." She smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Broken things can be mended, Lila. Not by them, not by the people who hurt you, by you. You've got to start believing you're worth more than that dollar they gave you." Her words stayed with me, like a seed planted in barren soil. I didn't believe them, not yet, but they were there, taking root in the quiet corners of my heart. Ms. Rosa became my lifeline in those weeks. She'd knock on my door with a plate of homemade empanadas, or invite me over for tea, her apartment a cozy clutter of books and knitted blankets. She'd tell me stories of her own life, growing up in Puerto Rico, moving to Boston as a young woman, surviving a marriage that left her bruised but not broken. "I learned to love myself when nobody else did," she'd say, her eyes bright with defiance. "You'll learn too." She was the one who got me writing again. I'd always loved words ever since I was a kid escaping into books. In college, I'd majored in English, dreaming of being a writer, but life had a way of burying those dreams under bills and exhaustion. Miss Rosa saw the notebooks I kept, filled with half-finished poems and stories, and she wouldn't let me hide them. "You've got a voice, Lila," she'd say, tapping the pages. "Use it. Tell your story. The world needs to hear it." I'd laugh it off, embarrassed, but she was relentless. She bought me a journal, a beautiful leather-bound one with my initials embossed on the cover, and told me to write every day. "Even if it's just one sentence," she said. "Write what hurts, write what heals." So I did. At first, it was just fragments, memories of my parents' coldness, flashes of Caleb's cruelty, the weight of that dollar in my pocket. But the more I wrote, the more it poured out. I wrote about the little girl who'd believed she was unlovable. I wrote about the teenager who'd worked herself to the bone for a chance at something better. I wrote about the woman I was now, lost and aching, but still fighting. The words were raw, messy, sometimes incoherent, but they were mine. For the first time, I felt like I was taking something back. Ms. Rosa was right about one thing. I was still here. I'd survived my parents' rejection, Caleb's abuse, a childhood that told me I was nothing. I didn't know what came next, but I knew I couldn't stay where I was, drowning in my own pain. So I made a promise to myself, there on that fire escape, with Ms. Rosa's hand in mine and the city humming below. I'd find a way to prove them wrong, not for them, not to win their love or approval, for me, because I was worth more than $1, even if I didn't fully believe it yet. The journal became my sanctuary. I'd write in the mornings before work, my coffee going cold as I filled page after page. I'd write at night when the loneliness crept in, the words a shield against the darkness. And slowly, something shifted. The pain was still there, sharp and unrelenting, but it wasn't the only thing. There was anger, yes, but also a spark of something else. Defiance, maybe, or hope. I started to see myself not as the girl they'd rejected, but as the woman I was becoming. Someone who could feel deeply and still keep going. Someone who could break and still mend. I didn't know it then, but those words, those late-night scribbles, were the first steps toward something bigger. They were the foundation of a story I'd tell one day, not just to myself, but to the world. A story about a girl who was given $1 and turned it into a legacy. But that was still a long way off. For now, I was just Lila, sitting on a fire escape, writing her way through the pain, with a neighbor who believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. The journal Ms. Rosa gave me became my lifeline, a place where I could pour out the hurt and start to piece myself back together. I'd write until my hand cramped, the pages filling with memories I'd buried and truths I'd been too afraid to face. It was like excavating my own heart, digging through layers of pain to find something solid underneath. But writing wasn't enough on its own. The world kept moving, and I had to figure out how to move with it. I was still broke, still grieving, still carrying that dollar like a scar. I needed more than words to keep going. I needed a plan, a purpose, something to prove I wasn't the nothing my parents had declared me to be. Work was where I started. My job at the marketing firm was entry level, the kind of gig where you're expected to smile through endless revisions and impossible deadlines. I'd been coasting, doing just enough to get by, but the will had lit a fire in me, not the warm, hopeful kind, but a sharp, angry one. I was tired of being invisible, tired of letting my parents' rejection define me. If they thought I was worth $1, I'd show them what $1 could become. I'd show myself, too, because deep down, I was still fighting to believe it. I started staying late at the office, volunteering for projects nobody else wanted. I'd rewrite ad copy until it sang, pitch ideas in meetings, even when my voice shook, and study the industry on my own time. My colleagues noticed. They'd raise their eyebrows when I took on extra work, or whisper to each other when I spoke up in brainstorming sessions. "Lila's different," I overheard one of them say in the break room, and for the first time, I didn't shrink from the attention. I wanted to be seen. I needed to be. Vanessa, my boss, called me into her office one afternoon, about 3 months after the will. I'd been working on a campaign for a local nonprofit, a small project most of the team had ignored. I'd poured everything into it, crafting a story about the organization's mission that was raw and real, the kind of thing I'd learned to write in my journal. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, her manicured nails tapping the desk, and fixed me with a look I couldn't read. "This is good, Lila," she said, holding up the campaign draft. "Really good. Where's this been hiding?" I didn't know how to answer. The truth was, it hadn't been hiding. It just hadn't been needed until now. The pain of the will, the anger, the late nights with Ms. Rosa's voice in my head, telling me I was enough. It had all poured into those words. I mumbled something about trying harder, but Vanessa waved it off. "You've got something special," she said. "A voice. Most people in this business fake it, but you're the real deal. Don't let that go to waste." She assigned me to a bigger project, a national campaign for a women's health brand, and told me to run with it. "Show me what you can do," she said, and I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in years, possibility. That project became my obsession. I'd work on it during lunch breaks, sketching ideas on napkins, and stay up past midnight refining taglines. I thought about the women the campaign was for, women like me, who'd been told they were less than, who'd had to fight for their place in the world. I wanted the campaign to feel like a battle cry, a reminder that they were enough, no matter what anyone said. I wrote from my heart, from the place where my pain lived, and it showed. When I presented the first draft to the team, the room went quiet. Vanessa's eyes were shining, and even the senior copywriters, who usually picked apart my work, nodded in approval. "This is it," Vanessa said. "This is what we're running with." The campaign was a small victory, but it felt like a turning point. For the first time, I saw what I was capable of when I stopped hiding. I started to believe, just a little, that Ms. Rosa was right, that I could mend myself, that I was worth more than that dollar. But belief is a fragile thing, and mine was tested constantly. I'd have days where the grief came roaring back, where I'd see a family laughing in a coffee shop and feel the ache of what I'd never had. I'd think about Caleb, living in our childhood home, and the anger would choke me. I'd write about it in my journal, pages and pages of rage and hurt, and Ms. Rosa would read them when I let her, her eyes soft but fierce. "Keep going," she'd say. "You're not done yet." Ms. Rosa was becoming more than a neighbor. She was a mentor, a guide, the grandmother I'd never had. She'd lived through her own pain, and she wore it like armor, not a wound. She'd tell me stories about her childhood in Puerto Rico, about the mother who'd dismissed her dreams, and the husband who'd tried to break her spirit. "I didn't let them define me," she'd say, her voice steady. "And you won't let your family define you either." She'd push me to take risks, to speak up, to stop apologizing for existing. When I told her about the campaign, she grinned like she'd known all along. "That's my girl," she said, and I felt a warmth I hadn't known I was craving. But the world wasn't done testing me. One evening, as I was walking home from the office, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me pick up. It was Mr. Hargrove, the lawyer who'd handled my parents' will. His voice was hesitant, like he was choosing his words carefully. "Lila, I thought you should know," he said. "Your brother's selling the house, the land, too. He's already got a buyer lined up." I stopped walking, the city noise fading to a dull roar. The house, the land, the last pieces of my family, gone, just like that. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He sighed. "Because I thought you deserved to know. And because, well, I didn't agree with what your parents did. You deserved better." I thanked him, hung up, and stood there on the sidewalk, the weight of it crashing over me. Caleb wasn't just taking the money, he was erasing our history, selling off the only home I'd ever known. I could picture it, the for sale sign staked in the front yard, the roses my mother loved trampled underfoot. I wanted to scream, to call him and demand answers, but what would that solve? He'd laugh, like he always did, and I'd be left feeling smaller than ever. Instead, I went home, climbed onto the fire escape, and wrote. I wrote about the house, the memories it held, the girl I'd been when I lived there. I wrote until my tears blurred the ink, until the pain felt like something I could hold instead of something that held me. Ms. Rosa found me there, as she often did. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just sat beside me, her presence steady and warm. "You're stronger than this," she said after a while. "You're stronger than him, stronger than them. They can take the house, the money, all of it, but they can't take you." I wanted to believe her, but it was hard. The house wasn't just a building. It was the last tether to my parents, to the hope that maybe, someday, they'd see me. Now it was gone, and I felt untethered, floating in a world that didn't want me. But Ms. Rosa wouldn't let me sink. She started dragging me to community events, poetry readings, art shows, anything to get me out of my head. One night, she took me to an open mic at a coffee shop in the South End. The room was packed, the air thick with the smell of espresso and nervous energy. I'd brought my journal at her insistence, but I had no intention of reading. I was there to listen, to disappear into someone else's words. But Ms. Rosa had other plans. When the host called for volunteers, she nudged me, her eyes gleaming. "Go on," she whispered. "Tell your story." I froze, my heart pounding. I wasn't ready. My words were private, raw, not meant for a room full of strangers, but she kept nudging, her faith in me, stronger than my fear. So I stood, my legs trembling, and walked to the mic. The spotlight was blinding, the room too quiet. I opened my journal, my hands shaking, and started to read. It was a piece I'd written about the dollar, about what it felt like to be worth so little to the people who should have loved me most. My voice cracked at first, but as I kept going, it steadied. The words poured out, heavy and true, and when I finished, the room was silent for a moment before it erupted in applause. I walked back to my seat, my face burning, but Ms. Rosa was beaming. "That's your power, Lila," she said. "Your voice. Don't ever let it go quiet." A few people came up to me afterward, strangers with kind eyes, saying my words had moved them, that they'd felt my pain. One woman, older, with gray streaks in her hair, squeezed my hand and said, "You're not alone." It was the first time I realized my story wasn't just mine. It was bigger, something that could reach others, something that could heal. That night was a turning point, though I didn't know it then. I started going to more open mics, sharing more of my writing, finding a community in those dimly lit rooms. I kept working hard at the firm, taking on bigger projects, earning Vanessa's respect. The campaign for the women's health brand launched, and it was a hit. Billboards went up across the city, my words plastered in bold letters for everyone to see. I'd walk past them sometimes, my heart swelling with a pride I hadn't known I could feel. but the pain was still there, a shadow that followed me. Caleb was selling the house, and I couldn't stop him. My parents were gone, and they'd never see what I was becoming. I was rising, but I was still fighting, still learning to believe I was enough. The open mic nights changed something in me, like a crack in a dam letting light through. I'd always thought my pain was something to hide, something shameful, but standing in front of strangers, reading words that bled from my heart, I realized it could be a bridge. People listened, they nodded, they clapped, they came up to me afterward with tears in their eyes saying, "I've been there too." My story, the dollar, the will, the family that chose my abuser over me, wasn't just mine anymore. It was theirs too, in ways I hadn't expected. And that realization, small as it was, gave me something to hold on to when the grief threatened to pull me under. I was still working at the marketing firm, and the success of the women's health campaign had shifted how people saw me. Vanessa started giving me more responsibility, putting me in charge of pitches and letting me lead client meetings. I'd walk into conference rooms, my heels clicking on the polished floors, and feel like an imposter at first. These were rooms full of people with expensive degrees and polished resumes, people who'd grown up with parents who believed in them. But I'd learned to fake confidence, to stand tall even when my knees shook, and slowly it stopped feeling like an act. My ideas were good, my words worked. Clients loved the campaigns I crafted, and Vanessa started calling me her secret weapon. It was the first time I'd ever felt like I belonged somewhere. But belonging didn't erase the past. I'd still have nights where I'd sit on my fire escape, the journal open in my lap, and write about the house Caleb was selling. I'd imagine him walking through the rooms, careless, tossing out my mother's old recipe books, or the quilt my grandmother made. I'd picture the land, the rolling fields my grandfather had loved, bulldozed for some soulless development. The anger was a constant ache, but I was learning to channel it. I'd write until my hand hurt, then read the words aloud to Ms. Rosa, who'd nod like she was hearing a sermon. "That's it, Lila," she'd say. "Turn the pain into power." Ms. Rosa was my anchor, but she wasn't the only one pushing me forward. At one of the open mic nights, I met a woman named Priya, a graphic designer with a quick laugh and a knack for making everyone feel like her best friend. She'd heard me read a piece about my parents' rejection, and afterward, she cornered me at the coffee shop counter, her eyes bright with excitement. "You're a storyteller," she said, like it was a fact, not a compliment. "Have you ever thought about doing something bigger with this, like a blog or a YouTube channel?" I laughed, embarrassed, and told her I wasn't ready for that. But Priya was persistent. She'd text me links to storytelling platforms, invite me to art events, and talk endlessly about how the world needed voices like mine. I wasn't convinced, but Priya's enthusiasm was infectious. She started dragging me to workshops, writing seminars, branding boot camps, even a weekend retreat for creative entrepreneurs. I'd sit in those rooms, surrounded by people who seemed so sure of themselves, and feel like I was playing catch-up. But I listened. I took notes. I started to see my writing not just as a way to process pain, but as a way to build something. Priya and I began collaborating. She'd design visuals for my poems, turning them into shareable graphics we'd post on Instagram. To my surprise, people responded. Strangers would comment, saying my words made them feel seen, or share their own stories of rejection and resilience. It was small, just a few hundred followers, but it felt like a spark. Work was heating up too. Vanessa pulled me aside one day and told me the firm was pitching for a major client, a national nonprofit focused on empowering young women. "I want you to lead this one," she said, her voice firm. "Your campaign for the health brand showed me you can connect with people on a level most can't. This is your shot to shine." I nodded, my heart racing, but inside I was terrified. This wasn't just a campaign, it was a chance to tell a story that mattered, to reach women who'd felt the same kind of dismissal I had. I threw myself into it, working late nights, pouring my own experiences into the pitch. I wrote about strength, about rising from rejection, about finding worth when the world tells you you're worthless. When we presented to the client, I stood at the front of the room, my voice steady, and told them why this mattered, not just to their organization, but to me. We won the contract. The client said my pitch had moved them, that they could feel the truth in every word. Vanessa took me out for drinks to celebrate, raising her glass with a rare smile. "You're going places, Lila," she said. "Don't let anyone stop you." I smiled back, but inside I was reeling. Going places? Me? The girl who'd been left $1 in her parents' will? It didn't feel real, but I was starting to want it to be. The nonprofit campaign became my focus for months. I worked with a team, shaping a national initiative called Rise Up, aimed at helping young women overcome systemic barriers. I wrote the taglines, scripted the PSAs, even helped design the workshops we'd roll out. In schools and community centers, every piece of it felt personal, like I was speaking to the version of myself who'd grown up believing she was nothing. I'd think about that girl sitting in her childhood bedroom, hearing Caleb's taunts through the walls, and wish I could tell her she'd make it, that she'd find a way to turn her pain into something beautiful. Priya was there through it all, cheering me on, but also challenging me. One night, over takeout in her cluttered apartment, she pushed again about starting a YouTube channel. "You're already telling your story in bits and pieces," she said, waving a chopstick for emphasis. "Why not go all in? People need to hear you, Lila, not just in poems or campaigns, but you, talking, sharing what you've been through." I hesitated. The idea of putting myself out there, raw and unfiltered, was terrifying. What if people judged me? What if Caleb saw it, or someone from Willow Creek? But Priya wouldn't let up. "You're not doing this for them," she said. "You're doing it for the people who feel like you did, for the ones who need to know they're not alone." She wore me down, and we started small. Priya helped me film my first video, a simple, shaky recording of me sitting on my couch, talking about the $1 in the will. I didn't script it, I just spoke, letting the words spill out like they did in my journal. I talked about the pain, the betrayal, the way it felt to be told I was worth nothing. I cried halfway through, my voice breaking, but I kept going. When we uploaded it, I was sure nobody would watch, but they did. Within a week, the video had 1,000 views, then 2,000. Comments poured in. Strangers sharing their own stories of family rejection, of being underestimated, of fighting to prove their worth. "Thank you for saying this," one woman wrote. "I thought I was the only one." The channel grew slowly but steadily. Priya handled the visuals, making my videos look polished despite our non-existent budget. I posted once a week, sharing pieces of my story, growing up in Willow Creek, surviving Caleb's abuse, finding my voice through writing. I didn't sugarcoat it. I talked about the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, the days I'd wanted to give up. But I also talked about the victories, the campaign, the open mics, the way Ms. Rosa and Priya had shown me I could keep going. People responded. They'd send messages, long and heartfelt, saying my videos had helped them through their own pain. I'd read them and feel a warmth in my chest, a sense that I was finally doing something that mattered. But success didn't erase the shadows. I'd still get news about Caleb, little updates that slipped through the cracks of my new life. A cousin from Willow Creek messaged me on Facebook, saying the house had sold, that Caleb had moved to a flashy condo in Charlotte. "He's acting like he's some big shot," she wrote, and I could feel her disapproval through the screen. I didn't respond, but it stung. He was living the life my parents had handed him, while I was still fighting for every inch of mine. I wrote about it in my journal, the words sharp and bitter, and Ms. Rosa read them with a frown. "Don't let him rent space in your head," she said. "He's got his path, and you've got yours. Yours is better?" She was right, but it was hard to believe some days. The channel, the campaign, the new confidence, they were real, but so was the pain. I was rising, but I was still carrying the weight of that $1, still proving to myself that I was enough. I didn't know it then, but the next few months would test that belief in ways I couldn't imagine. They'd show me just how far I'd come and how much further I could go. The YouTube channel was like a window I'd opened to the world, and I couldn't close it even if I wanted to. By the time I hit 10,000 subscribers, I was getting messages every day, long emails, short comments, even handwritten letters from viewers who'd found my videos. They'd tell me about their own families, their own rejections, the ways they'd been made to feel small. "You're helping me believe I can keep going," one girl wrote, a 19-year-old from Ohio who'd been kicked out by her parents. I'd read those words and feel a responsibility I hadn't expected, like my story wasn't just mine anymore, it was a lifeline for others. It scared me, but it also pushed me to keep going, to be honest, even when it hurt. The Rise Up campaign at work was gaining traction too. The nonprofit had rolled it out nationwide. With my words on billboards, bus stops, and TV ads, I'd turn on the news and hear my tagline, "Your worth is not their verdict," spoken by a young woman in a PSA, her voice steady and sure. It was surreal, seeing something that came from my pain resonate with so many. The campaign was a success, and Vanessa was thrilled. She called me into her office one morning, a rare grin on her face, and told me the nonprofit wanted me to speak at their annual gala in New York. "They want you to tell your story," she said, "the real one. They think it'll inspire people." I froze. Writing was one thing. Hiding behind a screen or a page felt safe. But standing in front of a room full of strangers, bearing my soul, that was different. I thought about the dollar, the will, Caleb, my parents' rejection. Could I really stand on a stage and talk about that without falling apart? Vanessa must have seen the panic in my eyes, because she leaned forward, her voice firm but kind. "You've already done the hard part, Lila. You lived it. Now you just have to share it." I nodded, my throat tight, and agreed. But as I left her office, my stomach churned. I wasn't sure I was ready. Priya, of course, was ecstatic. "This is huge," she said, practically bouncing as we sat in her apartment, planning the speech. She'd become my unofficial manager, handling the channel's graphics and helping me navigate the growing attention. "You're gonna kill it, Lila. People need to see you, not just your words." She helped me draft the speech, pushing me to be raw, but not self-pitying, to focus on the strength I'd found, not just the pain I'd endured. Ms. Rosa weighed in too, sitting on my couch with a cup of tea, her eyes sharp as she listened to me practice. "Don't just tell them what happened," she said. "Tell them what it made you. Show them the woman you are." Practicing that speech was like walking through fire. I'd stand in front of my mirror, the words catching in my throat, and see the girl I used to be, small, scared, desperate for her parents' love. I'd think about the dollar, still tucked in a drawer in my apartment, and feel the weight of it all over again. But I kept going because Priya and Ms. Rosa believed in me, and because I was starting to believe in myself. I wasn't just the girl they'd rejected anymore. I was Lila, the woman who'd built a life from nothing, who'd turned her pain into something that helped others. I wanted the gala audience to see that, to know it was possible. The night of the gala came faster than I expected. I flew to New York, my first time in the city, and felt overwhelmed by its energy. The honking taxis, the towering buildings, the crowds that moved like a living thing. The event was at a fancy hotel, all chandeliers and velvet drapes, and I felt out of place in my simple black dress, bought on sale the week before. But when I stepped into the ballroom, I saw the Rise Up banners, my words printed in bold letters, and something settled in me. This was my story, and I was here to tell it. The speech was near the end of the night, after dinner and a string of awards. I sat at my table, my hands clammy, as the MC introduced me. "Lila Evans, the voice behind Rise Up," she said, and the room applauded. I walked to the podium, my heart pounding so loud I was sure the microphone would pick it up. The lights were bright, the audience a sea of faces, but I took a deep breath and started. I told them about the dollar, about my parents' will, about growing up in a house where I was never enough. I talked about Caleb's abuse, my mother's silence, my father's disappointment. I didn't hold back. I let the pain spill out, raw and unfiltered, because that's what they needed to hear. But I didn't stop there. I told them about Ms. Rosa, about Priya, about the journal that saved me. I talked about the campaign, the channel, the strangers who'd become my community. I told them how I'd learned to see myself not as the girl they'd rejected, but as the woman I'd become, someone who could feel deeply and still rise. Your worth is not their verdict, I said, my voice steady now, echoing the campaign's tagline. It's not in the money they give you or the love they withhold. It's in you, in the choices you make, in the life you build. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment, and then they stood, clapping, some wiping tears from their eyes. I stepped off the stage, my legs shaking, but I felt lighter than I ever had. The gala was a turning point. The nonprofit posted my speech online, and it went viral, racking up millions of views. My YouTube channel exploded, jumping from 10,000 subscribers to 50,000 in weeks. People were sharing my story, quoting my words, saying I'd inspired them to keep going. I'd get messages from women all over the world, single mothers, college students, survivors of abuse, telling me they'd watched my speech and felt seen. You made me believe I'm enough, one wrote, and I cried reading it, because I was still learning to believe that myself. Work changed too. The success of Rise Up made me a name in the industry. Vanessa promoted me to creative director, a title I couldn't have imagined a year earlier. I was leading campaigns now, not just writing them, and my team looked to me for guidance. I'd walk into meetings and see respect in their eyes, not pity or indifference. It was heady, but it was also grounding. I knew what it had taken to get here, the nights I'd cried, the days I'd wanted to give up. I carried that with me, not as a weight, but as a reminder of what I'd overcome. Priya and Ms. Rosa were my rocks through it all. Priya was designing merch for the channel now, mugs and t-shirts with quotes from my videos like, "Your worth is not their verdict." She'd joke about quitting her day job to be my full-time creative director, but I could tell she loved being part of this. Miss Rosa was quieter, but her pride was fierce. "I knew you had it in you," she'd say, her voice thick with emotion. "You're not just surviving anymore, Lila. You're shining." But shining doesn't mean the shadows disappear. I'd still think about Caleb, about the house he'd sold, the money he'd spent. I'd hear rumors through the Willow Creek grapevine, cousins or old neighbors messaging me with updates. He was living large, they said, throwing parties, buying cars, acting like he'd earned it all. It burned, knowing he'd faced no consequences, that my parents' choice had rewarded his cruelty. I'd write about it, my journal filling with words I didn't share because they were too raw, too angry. Miss Rosa would read them and squeeze my hand. "Let it out," she'd say, "but don't let it own you." I was trying. The gala, the channel, the promotion. They were proof I was building something real, something my parents could never have imagined. But the pain was still there, a quiet ache that flared up when I least expected it. I'd see a family at the park, a mother hugging her daughter, and feel the loss all over again. I'd wonder if my parents would have been proud if they could see me now. Then I'd remember the dollar, and the anger would come rushing back. I was rising, but I wasn't done fighting. Not for their approval, I'd stopped needing that, but for myself, for the woman I was still becoming. The viral speech brought opportunities I hadn't dreamed of. Invitations to speak at conferences, offers to write for major publications, even a literary agent who wanted to talk about a book deal. I was overwhelmed, but Priya and Ms. Rosa kept me grounded, reminding me why I'd started. "This is your story," Priya would say. "Tell it your way." And I did, one video, one speech, one campaign at a time. I didn't know it then, but the biggest moment was still coming. A moment that would bring me face to face with the past I'd been running from, and force me to decide who I was going to be. The months after the gala felt like a whirlwind, like I'd been caught in a current I couldn't control, but didn't want to fight. My YouTube channel was nearing 100,000 subscribers, and every video I posted, whether it was about my childhood, my work, or just me sitting on my couch talking about resilience, seemed to strike a chord. I'd read the comments late at night, my laptop glowing in the dark, and feel a strange mix of gratitude and disbelief. People were calling me an inspiration, a voice for the overlooked, a survivor who'd turned pain into purpose. I didn't always feel like that person, but I was starting to believe I could be. Work was a different kind of high. As creative director, I was shaping campaigns that reached millions, telling stories that mattered. The Rise Up initiative had expanded with new programs for young women in underserved communities, and I was at the heart of it. I'd travel to schools and community centers, leading workshops, sharing my story, watching girls light up when they realized they could define their own worth. It was exhausting, but it filled me in a way nothing ever had. I'd see myself in those girls, the ones who sat quietly in the back, their eyes guarded but hungry for hope. And I'd speak directly to them, telling them they were enough, just as Ms. Rosa had told me. The speaking invitations kept coming. Conferences, universities, even a TEDx event in Boston. I said yes to most of them, not because I loved the spotlight, but because I knew what it meant to feel invisible. If my story could make one person feel seen, it was worth the nerves, the sleepless nights, the moments when I'd stand backstage, my heart pounding, wondering if I was enough. Priya was my cheerleader, filming every talk, turning snippets into videos for the channel. "You're building a movement," she'd say, half joking, but I could see the pride in her eyes. Ms. Rosa was quieter, but her support was just as fierce. She'd come to my local talks, sitting in the front row, her silver hair gleaming under the lights, clapping louder than anyone. The book deal was the biggest surprise. The literary agent who'd reached out after the gala speech was persistent, and after months of meetings, I signed a contract to write a memoir. The advance wasn't huge, but it was enough to move out of my crumbling apartment into a small but sunny place with a real kitchen and a view of the city. I'd sit at my new desk, the journal Ms. Rosa gave me, open beside my laptop, and write about my life, the dollar, the will, the family that didn't want me, the woman I'd become. It was harder than the videos or the speeches because it forced me to dig deeper, to confront the parts of my story I'd only skimmed before. But it was also freeing, like I was finally claiming every piece of myself. The world was starting to know my name. Articles called me a rising star in storytelling, a voice for women who'd been silenced. I'd open my email and find invitations to podcasts, collaborations with influencers, even a request to speak at a women's empowerment summit in Los Angeles. It was overwhelming, but I leaned on Priya and Ms. Rosa to keep me grounded. Priya would mock the fancy emails, doing dramatic readings over coffee, making me laugh until my sides hurt. Ms. Rosa would remind me to stay true to myself. "Don't let the noise change you," she'd say, her voice firm. "You're telling your story for the ones who need it, not for the ones who clap the loudest." But the noise was hard to ignore, especially when it came from unexpected places. One morning, I got an email from a producer at a major talk show, inviting me to share my story on national TV. They'd seen my TEDx talk, read the articles, and wanted me to be a guest. "Your journey of overcoming family rejection is exactly the kind of story our audience needs," the email read. I stared at the screen, my coffee going cold, and felt a mix of excitement and dread. This wasn't a small stage or a YouTube video I could edit. This was live, unfiltered, with millions watching. I called Priya, who screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Lila, this is it," she said. "You're going big time." Ms. Rosa was more cautious. "Make sure you're ready," she said, her eyes searching mine. "This'll bring your past right to your doorstep." She was right to warn me. The talk show was a turning point, but not just for the reasons I expected. I flew to Los Angeles, my nerves jangling like loose change. The studio was a maze of bright lights and busy people, and I felt small in my simple navy dress, clutching the note cards I'd written to calm myself. The host was warm, a woman with a megawatt smile who made me feel at ease during the pre-show chat. "Just tell your truth," she said, squeezing my hand. "That's all they want." But as I sat on the green room couch waiting for my segment, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than me, that it would ripple in ways I couldn't predict. When I walked onto the set, the audience's applause was deafening, a wall of sound that made my heart race. The host guided me through my story, starting with the dollar in the will, moving through my childhood, my struggle, my rise. I'd told it so many times by now, but this felt different, raw, exposed, like I was peeling back my skin for the world to see. I talked about my parents' rejection, Caleb's abuse, the way I'd fought to find my worth. I mentioned Ms. Rosa and Priya, the women who'd helped me see myself clearly. The audience was quiet, hanging on every word, and when I said, "Your worth is not their verdict," they erupted in cheers. I left the stage feeling lighter, like I'd laid something heavy down. The episode aired a week later, and the response was immediate. My channel doubled in subscribers overnight, hitting 200,000. The book deal got a boost, with pre-orders spiking. Strangers stopped me on the street, saying they'd seen the show, that my story had moved them. I'd smile, thank them, and walk away, with tears in my eyes because it still didn't feel real. I was just Lila, the girl from Willow Creek, the one nobody wanted. How was I here, helping people I'd never met? But Ms. Rosa's warning came true. The talk show didn't just bring fans, it brought my past crashing back. A few days after the episode aired, I got a message from a name I hadn't seen in years. My cousin Emily, from Willow Creek. Her words were short, almost frantic. "Lila, I saw you on TV. Everyone's talking about it here. Caleb's pissed. He's saying you lied, that you're making it all up for attention. Be careful." My stomach dropped. I hadn't mentioned Caleb by name on the show, but anyone from Willow Creek would know who I meant when I talked about my abusive brother. I'd expected him to hear about it eventually, but not this soon, not this way. I called Priya, my voice shaking, and read her the message. "He can't do anything," she said, her tone fierce. "He's just mad you're telling the truth. Keep going, Lila. Don't let him scare you." Ms. Rosa was less dismissive. She sat me down in her apartment, her hands folded in her lap, and looked at me with those piercing eyes. "Your brother's got no power over you unless you give it to him," she said. "But you need to be ready. People like him don't like being exposed. They lash out." I nodded, but the fear was there, a cold knot in my chest. I'd spent years running from Caleb, from the shadow he cast over my life. Now I'd called him out, not directly, but enough for him to feel it. And I knew he wouldn't let it go. The next few weeks were a blur of highs and lows. The summit in Los Angeles was a triumph. I spoke to a crowd of thousands, my voice strong, my story landing like a stone in still water. The book manuscript was coming together, each chapter a step toward healing. But the messages from Willow Creek kept coming. Old neighbors, distant relatives, even a former teacher, all saying the same thing. Caleb was furious, spreading lies, calling me a fraud. "He's telling everyone you exaggerated, that your parents were saints," one message read. "He's got the town on his side." I shouldn't have cared. Willow Creek was a lifetime away, but it hurt. That town was where I'd grown up, where I'd learned to feel small. Now it was rejecting me all over again. I kept going because I had to. The channel, the book, the speaking gigs, they were my proof that I was more than the dollar, more than Caleb's taunts, more than my parents' verdict. But the fear lingered, a whisper in the back of my mind. I knew my brother, knew the way he held grudges, the way he'd always found ways to hurt me. I didn't know what he'd do, but I knew he'd do something. And when it came, it would test everything I'd built, everything I'd become. The messages from Willow Creek were like splinters under my skin, small but impossible to ignore. Every few days, another one would arrive, a text from a cousin, an email from an old classmate, a Facebook message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. They all carried the same warning. Caleb was angry, spinning lies, painting me as the villain. "He's saying you made it all up," my cousin Emily wrote in one of her longer messages. "He's telling people you were the problem, that your parents gave you everything and you threw it away. He's got half the town believing him." I'd read those words and feel the old panic rising. The fear that I was still the girl he'd convinced me I was. Small, worthless, a liar. But then I'd look at my life, the channel, the book, the thousands of people who'd heard my story and believed it, and I'd remind myself that his lies couldn't touch me anymore. Or so I thought. The talk show appearance had made me a name, and the attention kept growing. My YouTube channel hit 300,000 subscribers, and the book, still months from release, was already generating buzz. I was speaking at events across the country now, from college campuses to corporate retreats, each talk a chance to refine my story, to make it sharper, truer. I'd stand on those stages, my voice steady, and tell people about the dollar, about surviving Caleb's cruelty, about building a life from the ashes of rejection. The audiences would clap, sometimes cry, and I'd leave feeling like I was finally claiming the space I'd been denied for so long. But every triumph came with a shadow, a whisper from Willow Creek that reminded me the past wasn't done with me. It was Priya who suggested I address it head-on. We were in her apartment, surrounded by takeout containers, brainstorming ideas for the channel. "You can't ignore this forever," she said, her eyes serious for once. "Your brother's out there, trying to rewrite your story. Don't let him. Tell the truth, Lila. All of it. Name him." I flinched at the idea. I'd never used Caleb's name in my videos or speeches, not out of kindness, but because saying it felt like summoning a ghost. Priya saw my hesitation and leaned forward, her voice fierce. "He doesn't get to hide. You've been carrying this for years. Put it down. Let the world see him for who he is." Miss Rosa agreed, though her approach was softer. "You don't have to fight dirty," she said, sitting on my couch with her usual cup of tea. "But you do have to fight. Your truth is your power, Lila. Don't let him twist it." Their words stayed with me, circling in my mind as I wrote in my journal, as I prepared for the next big moment. A keynote speech at a National Women's Empowerment Conference in Chicago. It was the biggest stage I'd ever had, with thousands in the audience and a live stream reaching millions. The organizers had asked me to share my full story, no holding back, and I knew this was the moment to decide. Would I name Caleb or keep him a shadow? The conference was a whirlwind of energy, a sea of women from every walk of life, their voices loud and unapologetic. I spent the day in workshops, listening to stories of resilience, feeling like I was part of something bigger than myself. But as the keynote approached, my nerves kicked in. I sat backstage, my note cards worn from handling, and thought about Caleb. I thought about the house he'd sold, the money he'd spent, the lies he was spreading in Willow Creek. I thought about the dollar still in my drawer and the girl I'd been when I received it. And I decided I wasn't going to let him hide anymore. When I walked onto the stage, the lights were blinding, the applause a roar that vibrated in my chest. I started as I always did, with the dollar, with the will, with the family that chose my abuser over me. But this time I went further. I said his name. "My brother Caleb," I said, my voice clear and steady, "was the one they chose. He was the one who hurt me, who made me feel like nothing, who took everything they gave him and never looked back." I told the truth about his cruelty, his taunts, the way he'd locked me in the basement, the way he'd laughed when I cried. I talked about the house, the land, the legacy he'd sold without a second thought. And I talked about how I'd risen, not because of him or my parents, but despite them. The audience was silent at first, hanging on every word, and then they erupted, a standing ovation that went on for minutes. I stood there, tears streaming down my face, and felt something shift inside me. Naming him wasn't just about exposing Caleb, it was about freeing myself. I'd carried his shadow for too long, let his lies linger in the corners of my mind. Now I'd said it, out loud, for the world to hear. There was no going back. The speech went viral, even more than the talk show. Clips circulated online, my words quoted in articles, on social media, in group chats. My channel surged past 500,000 subscribers, and the book pre-orders doubled. But the real impact was in the messages. thousands of them, from women and men who'd survived their own Calebs, siblings, parents, partners who'd tried to break them. "You gave me the courage to name my abuser," one woman wrote. "I've been silent for years, but I'm done." I'd read those messages and cry, not out of sadness, but because I was part of something real, something that was changing lives. But naming Caleb had consequences. A week after the speech, I got a call from Mr. Hargrove, the lawyer who'd handled my parents' will. His voice was strained, like he was delivering bad news. "Lila, I need to warn you," he said. "Caleb's threatening to sue. He's claiming defamation, saying you've ruined his reputation." I laughed at first, a bitter, disbelieving sound. Ruined his reputation? He'd built his life on lies, on the money my parents gave him, on the pain he'd caused me. But Mr. Hargrove was serious. "He's hired a lawyer," he said. "It might not go anywhere, but you need to be prepared." The news hit me like a punch. I called Priya, who was furious. "Let him try," she said. "He's got nothing. You told the truth, and the world knows it." Ms. Rosa was calmer, but just as resolute. "This is what happens when you shine a light on darkness," she said. "It fights back, but you're stronger than him, Lila. You always have been." I hired a lawyer, a sharp woman named Karen, who specialized in defamation cases. She reviewed my speeches, my videos, my book manuscript, and told me I was on solid ground. "You've told your story, and it's yours to tell," she said. "He can make noise, but he can't undo the truth." The threat of a lawsuit hung over me, but it didn't stop me. If anything, it made me louder. I posted a video addressing it, not naming Caleb again, but speaking directly to my audience. "Some people will try to silence you when you tell your truth," I said, my voice steady. "They'll threaten you, lie about you, try to make you small again. Don't let them. Your story is your power." The video got 1 million views, and the comments were a flood of support. "We've got your back, Lila," one person wrote, and thousands liked it. I felt it, the strength of a community I'd built, the people who believed in me when my own family hadn't. Then came the moment I hadn't expected. A month after the Chicago speech, I was invited to a community event in Willow Creek, of all places. A local women's group had seen my talk show appearance and wanted me to speak at their annual fundraiser. "We know your story started here," the organizer wrote. "We want to honor that." I stared at the invitation, my heart racing. Willow Creek, the town that had shaped me, rejected me, believed Caleb's lies. Going back felt like walking into a lion's den. But I also knew I couldn't say no. This was my chance to face the past, to stand in the place where I'd been nothing and show them who I was now. I said yes. The event was small, held in the community center where I'd once sung in the church choir. I flew to North Carolina, my stomach in knots, and walked into a room of familiar faces. Old neighbors, teachers, people who'd known me as the quiet girl from the Evans family. They looked at me differently now, their eyes wide with something like awe. I gave my speech, the same one I'd given in Chicago, but this time it felt personal, like I was speaking to the town itself. I named Caleb again, not out of spite, but because it was the truth. When I finished, the room stood, clapping, some crying, and I saw shame in their eyes, shame for believing him, for not seeing me. Afterward, a few people approached me, their voices soft with regret. "We didn't know," one woman said, her hands twisting together. "We should have done better by you." I nodded, my throat tight, and thanked them. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. As I left the community center, I felt a weight lift, like I'd reclaimed a piece of myself I'd left behind in Willow Creek. Caleb wasn't there. He'd stayed away, probably too proud to face me. But I knew he'd hear about it, and I knew it would burn. Standing in that community center in Willow Creek, feeling the weight of those familiar faces watching me, was like closing a circle I hadn't realized was still open. The applause lingered in my ears as I stepped out into the cool evening air. The North Carolina sky streaked with pink and gold. I'd come back to the place that had shaped me, the place that had tried to break me, and I'd told my truth. I'd named Caleb, not to hurt him, but to free myself from the shadow he'd cast. The people who'd once looked past me now saw me, really saw me. And their regret, their quiet apologies, were a kind of validation I hadn't known I needed. But as I walked to my rental car, the journal Ms. Rosa gave me tucked in my bag, I knew this wasn't the end. It was a milestone, not a finish line. My story wasn't over, and neither was I. The lawsuit Caleb threatened never materialized. My lawyer, Karen, told me his case was weak. My story was mine to tell, backed by the truth and years of witnesses who'd seen his cruelty, even if they hadn't spoken up then. He backed off, but not without a final jab. A week after the Willow Creek event, I got a letter in the mail, no return address, just my name in his jagged handwriting. Inside was a single sentence. "You'll always be nothing, Lila." No signature, but I didn't need one. I read it once, then tore it to pieces, my hands steady. His words didn't have the power they once did. They were just noise, a dying echo of a past I was leaving behind. I flew back to Boston, my heart a mix of exhaustion and quiet triumph. Priya met me at the airport, her grin wide as she pulled me into a hug. "You did it," she said, like it was a fact I needed to hear. "You went back and owned that place." Ms. Rosa was waiting at her apartment, a plate of empanadas ready, her eyes soft with pride. "You're not running anymore," she said, squeezing my hand. "You're standing tall." We sat together that night, the three of us, talking and laughing, and I felt something I hadn't in years, a sense of family, not the one I was born into, but the one I'd chosen. The months that followed were a blur of new beginnings. The book, $1 worth, came out to reviews that left me speechless. Raw, powerful, and profoundly moving, one critic wrote. Lila Evans is a voice for the silenced. It climbed the bestseller lists, not because it was flashy, but because it was true. I'd poured everything into those pages, the pain, the anger, the hope, the healing. Readers sent me letters, long and heartfelt, saying it had helped them face their own wounds. One girl, a high school senior, wrote that she'd decided to apply to college after reading it, because if I could rise, so could she. I kept that letter on my desk, a reminder of why I kept going. The YouTube channel was 1 million subscribers strong now, a community of people who'd found strength in my story and shared their own in return. I'd read their comments, their emails, and feel a responsibility to keep showing up, to keep being honest. I posted videos about the Willow Creek event, about Caleb's letter, about the choice to keep telling my truth even when it was hard. "Your worth does not depend on someone else's validation," I said in one, my voice steady, my eyes clear. "It's in you, in the life you build, in the love you give yourself." The comments flooded in, thousands of them, saying I'd helped them believe it too. Work was thriving. The Rise Up campaign had become a movement, with chapters in every state, and I was invited to consult on similar initiatives worldwide. I'd travel to places I'd only dreamed of as a kid, London, Tokyo, Cape Town, sharing my story, training others to tell theirs. Vanessa had become more than a boss. She was a mentor, pushing me to take risks, to dream bigger. "You're not just a creative director," she said one day, her eyes sharp. "You're a leader. Act like it." So I did, launching a side project, a scholarship fund for young women from underserved communities, named after Ms. Rosa, who cried when I told her. "You're giving them what I gave you," she said, her voice thick, "a chance to see themselves." But the biggest moment came quietly, almost by accident. I was cleaning out my apartment, packing for a speaking trip, when I found the dollar, still tucked in the drawer where I'd left it years ago. It was creased now, worn from the times I'd held it, stared at it, let it anchor my pain. I sat on my bed, the bill in my hands, and thought about everything it had meant. The rejection, the betrayal, the wound that had nearly broken me. Then I thought about where I was now, the book, the channel, the scholarship, the life I'd built. That dollar wasn't my worth anymore. It was just a piece of paper, a relic of a story I'd outgrown. I didn't burn it or throw it away. Instead, I took it to a frame shop and had it sealed in a simple glass case with a small plaque that read, "Your worth is not their verdict." I hung it on my wall, not as a reminder of the pain, but as a symbol of what I'd overcome. It was my heirloom, not from my parents, but from myself, a testament to the woman I'd become, the one who'd taken a single dollar and turned it into a legacy. I never heard from Caleb again, not directly. Rumors trickled in from Willow Creek. He'd blown through the money, lost the condo, alienated the town with his arrogance. I didn't wish him ill, but I didn't forgive him either. Forgiveness wasn't about him, it was about me, and I wasn't ready to let go of the anger completely. Maybe one day, but not yet. For now, I was focused on living, on building, on being the woman I'd always wanted to be. Ms. Rosa and Priya were still my anchors. Ms. Rosa, now in her 80s, was slower but just as fierce, still dragging me to poetry readings, still reading my journal when I let her. Priya was my partner in crime, running the channel with me, dreaming up new ways to share my story. We'd started a podcast together, interviewing other survivors, amplifying their voices. "This is just the beginning," she'd say, her eyes bright with plans. And I believed her because I'd learned that beginnings were possible, even after endings. I still had days when the pain came back, when I'd see a family laughing in a park and feel the ache of what I'd never had. But those moments were fewer now, and they didn't define me. I'd built a life that was mine, full of purpose, community, and a love for myself I'd fought hard to earn. I'd taken the dollar my parents gave me and turned it into something they could never have imagined. A story that reached millions, a movement that lifted others, a legacy that would outlast their verdict. As I write this, I'm sitting in my apartment, the framed dollar on the wall, my laptop open to a new video script. The world is still listening, still waiting for what I'll say next. And I'm ready to keep talking, not because I've arrived, but because I'm still becoming. Your worth does not depend on someone else's validation. It's in you, in the choices you make, in the life you build. I know that now, not just in my head, but in my bones. And if I can learn it, so can you.